Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're finally hitting the capstone of our foundational BYOFAQ series. We've already mapped out the drivers, the influencers, and the steady relators. Now, we're completing the picture.
That's right. Today is all about that final piece of the puzzle, the highly analytical high C archetype, also known as the analytical systems builder. You know the type. If you've ever worked with someone who insists on slowing down to get everything absolutely 100% right, someone who is literally scrutinizing the fine print while the rest of the team is already sprinting to the finish line, well, you've definitely met a high C. So let's figure out how to understand them and, more importantly, how to actually work with them without pulling your hair out.
To do that, we've put together a highly logical 6-part roadmap. We're going to cover spotting the high C, understanding their motivations under pressure, and navigating conflict. Then, we'll dive into the rules of engagement, explore their blind spots, and finally, zoom out to the complete BYOFAQ blueprint. And honestly, this precise agenda is exactly what a high C needs to hear before we even start. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, spotting the high C and recognizing the signs. The good news is, you usually don't have to look too hard to find them. They tend to announce themselves right out of the gate through these carefully constructed, layer-building questions that can totally catch you off guard if you aren't ready for them. Exactly. And to figure out why they ask all those questions, you really have to look at their core drive. A high C is fundamentally driven by correctness, competence, and building a process that actually works. For them, the ultimate trade-off is always quality over speed. A high C would happily spend 2 extra weeks perfecting a project rather than shipping it out at 80% done. To them, shipping something that's broken or inaccurate, that isn't a victory. It's a complete failure of the process. They desperately want to be competent, they expect that same competence from you, and they absolutely despise arbitrary chaos. And that intense drive shows up in a really fascinating way when you compare their verbal style to their physical style. Verbally, they speak in layers. They're the ones in the meeting asking, okay, but why are we doing this instead of that? They aren't trying to challenge your authority. They are literally just building the logic chain from first principles in their head. Plus, they are incredibly precise. They won't say more or less this. They're going to say approximately this. You'll even catch them correcting themselves mid-sentence, saying something like, actually, scratch that. I said March, but I meant mid-March.
But physically, they are totally restrained. You'll see very small gestures. They're usually sitting quietly in the back of the room with a notebook, just taking meticulous notes. They observe long before they ever speak up. They are entirely oriented toward the information, not necessarily the interpersonal dynamics of whoever is in the room.
Okay, moving right along to Section 2, motivations and handling pressure, or what happens when stakes rise. We know they crave precision, but what exactly happens when the timeline shrinks or a full-blown crisis hits? Right, that is the million-dollar question. What happens when the pressure rises? Because for a lot of the other archetypes, pressure means speeding up. It means taking immediate action. But for the high C, their behavioral response is the exact opposite. When the pressure is on, the high C hits the brakes hard. They slow down for analysis. When things get tense, you'll hear them say things like, let's run this by legal first, or I really need to see those Q2 numbers one more time. People constantly misinterpret this as hesitation or stalling, but it's not. It is calculated risk mitigation. They are trying to eliminate risk by gathering more information.
But there is a huge vulnerability here. In a situation of true ambiguity, like when there simply is no data available to guide a decision, a high C can completely freeze up. They just cannot commit to a path that they can't verify with facts.
So how does that play out when they butt heads with someone? Let's look at Section 3, navigating conflict through logic and debating the data. Arguing with a high C is a super unique experience, and it honestly deeply confuses the more emotional or relationship-focused archetypes on the team. The absolutely crucial point to remember here is that high Cs debate the data, not the relationship. If you disagree with them, they don't take it as a personal attack at all. They just view it as a great opportunity to clarify the logic. Sure, they might come across as cold, but in their mind, they're simply focusing on the evidence at hand.
And here's a truly fascinating part. Once the technical question is resolved, the conflict is completely over for them. No grudges. If you walk away still feeling emotionally bruised, a high C will be genuinely confused, thinking, wait, we fixed the spreadsheet. Why on earth are you still upset?
Which brings us nicely to Section 4, rules of engagement, focusing on communication, delegation, and feedback. If you want to maximize a high C's potential without causing major friction, you really need a specific playbook. let's rapid-fire these communication rules, shall we? First, send data first. Whatever you do, do not verbally pitch a high C and demand a decision on the spot. Send them the brief, let them process it, and then talk. Second, use logic over emotion. Telling them a project will make people happy does absolutely nothing, but telling them it will reduce errors by 23% based on a pilot test, now you've got their attention. Third, ask for their input, not just their blessing. They really want to use their analytical minds. Fourth, don't rush them. Fifth, be incredibly precise with your language. And finally, show your work. Walk them through your reasoning step by step. Now, when it comes to delegation, the absolute worst thing you can do is be vague. If you hand a high C a project and just say, hey, make this better, that is a total nightmare for them because better isn't a measurable metric. Instead, you've got to follow these 5 steps. Step 1, give them your exact specific needs. Step 2, establish a clear timeline. Step 3, define the exact quality standard you're looking for. Step 4, outline any constraints. And step 5, get out of their way and let them own it. They do not need daily check-ins. If they hit a roadblock, their own logical systems will prompt them to notify you. And if you ever need to give a high C feedback, you have to translate emotional friction into system calibration. Never make it about their personality. So instead of saying, you're too critical, try saying, let's calibrate to catch risks without creating false alarms. Instead of saying, you're cold, frame it as an equation. The logic matters and the relationship matters. And if they're dragging their feet, don't say, you're too slow. Say, we need a system to balance speed and accuracy. If you frame the feedback as a system problem, a high C will immediately jump in to help you fix that system. Awesome. We are rounding the corner into Section 5, blind spots and superpowers, exploring the dual nature of the high C. Let's take a look at their critical vulnerabilities, right alongside their irreplaceable strengths. We touched on this a bit earlier, but their biggest blind spot is definitely analysis paralysis. They can easily mistake gathering endless amounts of data for actual wisdom. And because they are so laser-focused on logic, they also severely underestimate the emotional impact their decisions might have on a team. Plus, they tend to work in deep isolation, which means the rest of the team often misses out on their brilliant insights.
Right, and perhaps their most costly blind spot is over-criticism. Because their brain is literally wired to spot errors, they often lead with what's wrong instead of validating what's right. Over time, that can really demoralize a team. And crucially, they often forget that slowness has a cost. They fear the cost of making a mistake, but completely miss the cost of a lost market opportunity.
Which leads perfectly to this quote. Perfect is often the enemy of done. For the high C, this isn't just some overused cliche, it is their ultimate developmental hurdle. The greatest growth for a high C happens when they finally realize that sometimes speed itself is a form of quality. But listen, we absolutely cannot understate their superpower. High Cs prevent disasters. Period. They are the ones whose code doesn't have hidden bugs and whose contracts don't have catastrophic liabilities buried in them. When everyone else is caught up in the hype and moving way too fast, the high C is that vital voice saying, wait, hold on, what about this? They build trust through absolute precision. The core gift of a high C is that they build systems and make decisions that actually hold up and endure over time. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the Complete Archetype Blueprint, and our BYOFAQ series finale. With the high C fully covered, it's time to zoom out and look at the whole ecosystem. As you can see, the high C flawlessly fits right into this complete BYOFAQ behavioral blueprint. Think about it. You need the dominance to push the pace forward. You need the influence to rally the team together. You need the steadiness to maintain harmony and consistency. And you absolutely need the conscientiousness, the high C quadrant, to ensure the whole thing doesn't just fall apart because of a fatal flaw. They are one incredibly vital quadrant of a fully functioning, unstoppable team. But, that leaves us with one massive, lingering question. We've mapped out these 4 foundational blueprints in isolation, but in the real world, nobody is just one thing.
Exactly. So what happens when these archetypes actually combine? What happens when you put a high D's intense drive for speed into the exact same person as a high C's demand for perfection? Well, that is where the real complexity of human behavior begins. And that is exactly what we are going to be exploring in the next phase of our BYOEF Explainer series. Until then, take a look around your team, spot your high Cs, and hey, make sure you send them the data first. Thanks so much for joining us.